had always dreamed of going to college somewhere far from home. A place where I could finally be myself, free from the burdens and expectations that had weighed on me for years. Growing up, my relationship with my parents was difficult, to say the least. They had always favored my younger brother, Jacob, and while I knew favoritism was an unfortunate reality in some families, it still hurt to feel like a second-class family member in my own home. College was my chance for independence, and I had worked tirelessly throughout high school to make it happen. Jacob, on the other hand, had never taken school seriously. He had the popularity and charisma that I, a more introverted person, could never match, and he coasted by on charm more than anything else. While he was out with friends or skipping classes, I was home studying, doing assignments, and working to keep up my grades. I had always been the responsible one, which also meant I was often tasked with looking out for Jacob, even when he showed no respect for my efforts. When we were younger, my parents constantly compared us, but as we got older they began excusing his behavior rather than addressing it. They claimed Jacob just had a different path, and even when his grades began to tank in high school, they didn't pressure him to improve. Instead, they began pressuring me to help him, as if his future were somehow my responsibility. As college application season rolled around, I worked with more determination than ever. I applied to several business schools, most of them out of state, with Stanford as my dream school. The idea of attending Stanford felt almost surreal. I was excited for a fresh start, and I poured myself into my application, hoping my grades, extracurriculars, and essays would be enough to get me in. The wait was nerve-wracking. While my friends began receiving responses from schools, I was still waiting to hear back from Stanford. Weeks turned into months, and as spring arrived, I hadn't heard anything. I started to worry something had gone wrong with my application. My friends assured me that the admissions office could simply be taking longer to process applications, especially with a prestigious school like Stanford, but something inside me couldn't shake the feeling that something else was wrong. Finally, I decided to call the admissions office, thinking perhaps I'd made a mistake or forgotten a document. When I reached a representative and explained my situation, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. The representative finally spoke, saying my application had been withdrawn months ago shortly after it was submitted. Shocked, I explained that I had never withdrawn my application and asked if they could give me any information on who had. Their answer confirmed my worst fears. The withdrawal request had come through my email account, but I knew I hadn't touched my application after submitting it, so someone else must have done it. My mind raced, and it didn't take long for me to zero in on who might have access to my email. My parents. They'd had my password since I was a kid, back when I used to use my dad's laptop. That evening, I confronted them, hoping there was some mistake. I asked them directly if they had withdrawn my application. My mom's face went pale, and after a moment of silence, she admitted to it. She looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed, but there was no apology in her voice. She explained that it had been a difficult decision and that they were doing what was best for the family. My dad, backing her up, added that they were afraid I would get into Stanford, which would make Jacob feel inferior and could hurt his self-esteem. They said they wanted to protect him from the pressure of being compared to me if I ended up at such a prestigious school. It was as if the air had been knocked out of me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, that they would sacrifice my future to spare Jacob's ego. I asked if they cared about how their actions might affect me, and my mom, as if she were stating the obvious, replied that I was strong, resilient, and would be fine at any college. She believed Jacob wouldn't be. The betrayal cut deeply, and I felt rage, disappointment, and heartbreak all at once. Without another word, I went to my room, packed a bag, and walked out of the house. I couldn't bear to stay under the same roof as people who had sabotaged my dreams. I went to my grandparents' house, knowing they were the only people who could understand the depth of what I was feeling. My paternal grandparents, who had always shown me unwavering support, were appalled when I told them what had happened. My grandfather's face turned red with anger as I recounted my parents' actions, and my grandmother shook her head, her eyes filled with sympathy. They told me they'd always suspected there was favoritism, but never realized it was this extreme. They comforted me, offering me a warm place to stay and reminding me that my worth wasn't determined by my parents' actions. The next day, my grandfather took matters into his own hands. He called my parents, expressing his profound disappointment in their actions. He told them in no uncertain terms that what they had done was unforgivable, and they had lost his respect. Later, my grandparents talked among themselves and decided to reach out to my maternal grandparents. Together, they discussed a plan to support me in my education, no matter what it took. A few days later, my grandparents sat me down with a surprising announcement. They told me they had decided to completely cover my college tuition and expenses, regardless of where I ended up going. They didn't want me to have to worry about finances or depend on my parents for anything. I was overwhelmed with gratitude, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope for the future. But that wasn't all. My grandparents shared that they had decided to alter their wills. They explained that they had always intended to leave a substantial inheritance to my parents, but after seeing the way they'd treated me, they were planning to cut them out of their wills entirely. My grandparents were deeply disappointed in their actions and felt it was only right to hold them accountable. This news left me in shock. I hadn't expected such a drastic response, but my grandparents were resolute. They assured me that this decision wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting me and ensuring that I had the support I needed to succeed. They saw me as someone who deserved to be nurtured and respected, not sabotaged for the sake of another's feelings. Days later, my parents called. I hadn't spoken to them since I'd left, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Instead of apologies, however, they were furious. They accused me of turning my grandparents against them, airing dirty laundry and causing a rift in the family. My mother's voice dripped with disdain as she accused me of being ungrateful, saying I was blowing things out of proportion. She insisted that I didn't understand their reasoning, that I wasn't mature enough to see the bigger picture. I was furious and snapped back, telling them that they'd brought this upon themselves. I reminded them that they had chosen to prioritize Jacob's feelings over my future, and now they were facing the consequences. I hung up, feeling a sense of satisfaction, though later, doubts crept in. Had I been too harsh? Some friends thought I should have taken the high road, but I couldn't ignore the depth of the hurt they'd caused. I confided in my grandparents about the call. They assured me that my anger was justified and suggested that I could consider blocking my parents if their calls continued to be toxic. They told me that I deserved respect, not manipulation, and they would stand by me no matter what. With their support, I began preparing for college again, this time feeling free of the shadow my parents had cast over me. Although I wasn't going to Stanford, my grandparents helped me enroll at another reputable business school, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about my future. I knew I had a fresh start ahead of me, and with my grandparents' love and support, I was ready to make the most of it. The day I left for college, my grandparents drove me, helping me set up my dorm and making sure I had everything I needed. They hugged me tightly before leaving, reminding me to stay in touch and to never doubt my worth. Standing in my new dorm room, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I wasn't just starting college, I was starting a new life, one where I could finally prioritize my own dreams and ambitions without interference. Over the next year, I threw myself into my studies, meeting new friends and building a network of supportive people. I kept in touch with my grandparents regularly, updating them on my classes, my new friends, and the life I was building for myself. With their encouragement, I was able to let go of the bitterness I'd felt toward my parents. While I would likely never forget their betrayal, I refused to let it define my future. Looking back now, I realize my grandparents saved me in more ways than one. They showed me the power of love and loyalty, and they reminded me that true family stands by you, even when others let you down. I may not have taken the path I originally envisioned, but with their support, I'm forging a new one that's mine alone.
Did you hear? I heard Alex only works out at the gym for the mirror selfies. He does like one set of curls and then spends the rest of the time finding the right lighting.